Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for the invitation to come and speak here at Creative Mornings, and thank you all for showing up. We need to have this one changed into my presentation. Yeah, like this. It's like this, it's fine, excellent. So I'm here to talk about work, or actually more for us it's not just about it's redefining work, as you said, and also actually it's a kind of, like, as a journalist we're in a sort of identity crisis at the moment, and we sort of have to reinvent what it is that we do and why it is that we're doing this. But before I start talking about that, I need to talk a bit about what it is that I have been doing and actually also still am doing. So I'm a journalist, and I'm based in Cairo, Egypt, where I work as a freelance correspondent. I've been in the Middle East for 6 years. Last 4 or 5 years has mostly consisted of me covering the uprisings in the North African part of the Middle East, in Egypt, in Libya, and in Tunisia. I'm a freelancer. I've mostly been working for Politiken, covering the uprisings and what followed. And now, of course, as a journalist, what I live off is telling stories. So let's start by telling a story. Tack. And I will tell you a story of once when someone made a joke on me, and I became famous all over the social media in Egypt for a few hours at least. And it happened this way. Yes, there we are. So this is me here with my pen and paper, and in front of me is a woman dancing. And up here the text says, this woman is dancing and we know why, but what the hell is this guy doing? And this guy down here, the laughing guy, then answers, he's counting the number of hip shakes. Now what is actually happening in here is that this is election day in Egypt, and I'm out to the local polling stations in my neighborhood to talk to people, to see what they're saying about this election. And I come down to this polling place, and there's this loud nationalistic songs playing out of a car stereo, and there's this woman who's dancing. This is in front of the women's line for the polling station, and this woman is dancing to this song and trying to cheer up everyone and get people all excited about voting. So I think this is an interesting woman to talk to. It would bring some color to the article that I'm going to write about this election. And I go speak to her, and while I'm speaking to her, she keeps on dancing. And so while I'm interviewing her, there is this local photographer who takes this photograph, and they put it up online. I don't know for what story they used this particular picture for. Maybe they used it for a story about how foreign media was covering the elections, I'm not sure. But then some Egyptian guy, young guy probably, who's sitting alone at home, he's probably not gone down to vote, and he takes up this image and decides to make some fun of it. And then he makes up this and puts it out online on Facebook, and it gets spread all over Facebook, and all my friends, Egyptian friends, were having a laugh about it. But what's the ironic thing about this is that actually this question, what the heck is this guy doing, was exactly what I was asking myself on these kind of occasions on an election day. Because election day, like when you're in international media, and elections is something we cover always. We cover it all the time. And so on a day like this, I would go out to these polling stations and I would meet so many of my colleagues. And we would all be out there basically reporting the same story, talking to random people at the polling stations. I would go home, I would go online, and I would find all these stories, story after story, tweet after tweet, basically reporting the same information. So this made me ask myself, well, what is the value in what I'm doing? What's the purpose of that? When everyone have access to all of these stories and they're all basically the same, what's then my purpose? And this question was brought where I felt most strongly when I was covering the uprising in Libya. When I went to Libya several times during 2011 and the uprising against the rule of Muammar al-Gaddafi, again, had this experience of being in a place with so many journalists at the same time. And when we went, for instance, when Tripoli, when the capital fell, we all came to Tripoli after the rebels seized control of the town. We all moved into the same one hotel that the rebels had seized from Muammar Gaddafi's regime, and we were allowed to stay in that hotel. That meant we were all staying in one place. So the lobby was just packed and full of reporters. And we, of course, in that situation, you try as a reporter, you would want to go and have your own story and not try just to go down to the Martyrs Square and talk to the people celebrating there, but to go out and find your own stories. And we tried our best. But even when once we thought we'd found a really, really important story, a story of a massacre that hadn't been told so far, we hadn't heard about it, we talked in one of the hospitals, we met a survivor from this massacre, and we thought we'd found this unique story. But it turned out that before I had even written it, it was all over the internet. Someone else had already picked it up. Then everyone started talking about it. All the TV stations went to this place and filmed the remains. So it was all over the place. And this then contrasted greatly with what happened after Muammar Gaddafi's regime fell, when it finally fell in the fall of 2011. I had gone to Libya several times during 2011. My paper had paid for me a very expensive war insurance. I had protective gear with me. I had satellite equipment. It was very expensive, and it was very expensive for all the media in covering the uprising. After the uprising, when there was no longer any NATO planes bombing Muammar Gaddafi's forces and supporting the rebels, the interest totally subsided. And in the spring of 2012, I really wanted to go to Libya to see what had happened after the revolution, after the uprising, after Muammar Gaddafi's regime had fell. When I wanted to go, I couldn't even get my editor to pay the plane ticket. So I had to finance this trip all on my own. And I went there, and there was almost no journalists left. There was lots of interesting stories, lots of things to tell, and I tried to tell it, and I sold some stories. I only made enough money to cover my expenses. But actually, what was happening was very, very important, because at that time, what's happened after the revolution was that the internal fighting had begun, and this was a very weak state, and it was a very confusing and uncertain state. And what this then developed into over the course of a year and a half was a civil war that also then led to kind of chaos, where it was possible for people smugglers to send off these boats, these small rubber boats packed with refugees, of which many of the boats sank in the Mediterranean Sea. And then, of course, again the attention turned to Libya, and we started to take an interest again. But it had to take these disasters in the period in between, where we could have told those stories about what was about to happen, and we could have a crucial influence on Europe. We weren't there, and we weren't telling the story. So this is me in Libya in 2012. One of the survivors of this massacre. Yeah, so what happens here is that we as journalists have always had this habit of moving like in a herd. We always follow each other. And there used to be a very good reason for that. The reason used to be that when people only had access to a few sources of information, back 20 or 30 years ago, you would have one television channel or two, have one radio, you would have a few newspapers. It was the journalist's job to tell the most important stories, because people might only go to that one source to find out what was going on in the world, so it was our job to tell the most important stories. This, of course, doesn't really make sense anymore. Now people have access to abundant number of sources, lots of media. We have access to them instantly. Someone just needs to send out a tweet, and everyone, everywhere in the world, can access that piece of information. So it no longer makes sense for us to be telling those same stories. And this is where our project comes in, and what we decided to do, because what we need to ask ourselves is exactly that question that I was asked: what the heck am I doing? When we are in a situation, I mean, how is it that I, as a journalist, am making a difference when I'm writing this particular story? And this, of course, is something that we need to do for several reasons. One of them is this one. Libya is that otherwise we portray the world like this. So this is how, if you look at the coverage, I think this is from 2012, I think. This is The Guardian, the British newspaper. The Guardian, this is their coverage of the world, based on of course, on which countries on these few spots that we find the most important. This is the image we portray of the world. So this is one problem. It gives a skewed image of what's happening in the world and what's important in the world. But the second thing is that also for us as journalists, if we're going to sustain our jobs, how can we keep on telling those same stories? How does that create a value for anyone sitting in front of his laptop and have access to all of this information? And this is very relevant right now. Many of the newspapers, especially, are having very much trouble financing their business, and they are quite arrogantly, I would say, always discussing how can we get people to pay for what we're doing. So, is there any other business where you can have a product, people are not really buying into it, they're not buying online subscriptions, and you believe that the problem is with the customer? You're saying it's on them, they're supposed to pay for what we're doing. How can we find a way for them to pay? Whereas we should be asking ourselves, are we producing the right product? Are we actually making something that people would be willing to pay for? So this is why we need to have a redefinition of what it is that we do as a media. Because we used to have a monopoly. We used to have a monopoly of information. You had to go to the TV station or the newspaper to get the information about the world. That's why it was so easy to monetize journalism, because you had to go to us to get information, and therefore we could also charge money for that. This is no longer the case. So the game has changed for us. Like, for instance, when what happened in Paris, the tragedy that happened a few weeks ago, it's not all of the news media go and send people to spend enormous resources on covering that one event. But really, how many in Denmark, we counted, there were 16 different news outlets sending journalists to Paris to cover what was happening. Was there a need among did anyone ask, is there a need among the public for having 16 different sources, Danish sources, in addition to all the international sources, in addition to everything you could find on social media on what was happening? But no one is asking those questions in our business. And this is what we really need to do. Ask that question. What the heck are we doing right now? Is that making a difference to anyone? This is what we are doing with this.
There is breaking news.
Fox News alert now, breaking news. This is significant.
And that is it for us today. Okay, I don't know whatever it is, it's not right on the teleprompter. I don't know what that is. I've never seen that. Yeah, I can't read it. There's no words on it. What is for credits? I don't know what that means. What does that mean? All right, go, go.
All right, so this is our project that we're working on. Just talk a bit about it in English for those of you who didn't understand the writing in Danish in the video. Our idea is to create a web magazine that totally does not at all talk about or focus on breaking news, doesn't focus on all the stories that everyone else is talking about. We will go our different places and tell those stories that you never hear about and that we believe will surprise people and give new insights and perspectives on the world. And we are 25 correspondents, Danish correspondents. All of us are freelancers based in all around the world. And out of those 25, we are 4 of us who are working on this. We're working on developing this project. We've been doing that for years. We started down actually all the way back in 2010. Most of what we've done, we've developed on meetings on Skype and Hangout, because we've been based all around the world. It's also why it's taken a long time to get to where we are today. Actually, there are, we then are 4 of us, and then we have got 22 other correspondents based around the world who we've got to sign up for our team and be a part of our team, but we are the ones who are mainly driving it, and in the middle is our web designer, Bjarke Mutu, which maybe some of you know him. And still today, I mean, I think I've met half in person. I've said hi to half of the correspondents in our team. Most of them we just emailed or talked to on Skype and Hangout. I just met our guy in Argentina the other day for the first time. So this is how we've been developing this project. Now we say that we want. We can see where we are based all around the world. We have given great priority to be in South America and in Africa and Southeast Asia, where you have the least media coverage. And so we say that we want to do a web magazine, but this is just the first step, and really the platform itself is not that important. This is what we need to start to understand as journalists also, that it's not the products or the platforms that we make that are important, but we're very much brought up to think that we're making a product to people, we're giving them a package, but this is not how people consume media anymore. People used to consume media more like they had their newspaper and they would open it and they would read through it, they would sit through the entire news broadcast. This is not how people, or some people are still using the media this way, and this is why there's still some business in newspapers. But this is changing, and clearly the future is not in that way to consume media. Lots of people, probably most of you guys, are using media. You're getting onto a media site because someone is sending you a link. Most likely you get there from Facebook. This is also what the statistics show. The more and more people get onto news sites from Facebook or Twitter, they never even go to the front page of the news site. So this means that the whole package is not important anymore. Also, the type of media that you produce is not that important anymore. We're still working. You have print media, written media, you have broadcast media, you have radio. They're always still working quite separately. But then online, it doesn't make any sense, because online platform facilitates all these kinds of media. So we have to get away from thinking of what we're doing as a product and as a particular type. So actually, also I would even say that when I'm standing now in front of you in this room, when we're not even online, we're physically in physical place together, this is the same. This is also a kind of journalism. I'm here communicating something to you. And this is what's important, not whether I'm here or I'm writing this in an article and put it on online, or if I'm sitting in front of a video camera that's recording me and that's put on YouTube. It's the same. So this is why what the really redefinition thing that we are entering into journalists is that we have to keep focus on the individual article or video or whatever, or talk that we're doing. It's the individual, that individual thing that matters, and what is our purpose. This is what people might pay for. This is what there's a value in, not the whole product. So we need to think a lot less. We need to actually probably make a lot less content, which is very difficult for journalists to accept. But right now, news outlets are pouring out an enormous amount of content onto an online platform where there's already enormous amounts of information out there. So we need to, again, think, what the heck am I doing before we actually start to write anything. And what we're going to do is that we're not going to, I mean, for us it doesn't matter if we're going to make this web magazine. We want to have our own platform to facilitate a special kind of stories. But for us, that's just one way that we could communicate things. I mean, we could make a newsletter for people who are especially interested in South America or Chinese economy. That could be a way for us to serve our readers. We could make like a public Google Hangout session where we interview some people interesting. We invite people in. We let them also ask questions to that interesting person that we brought into our studio out in the world. We could also make events, things like this, where we come and actually talk in person and bring the stories home to a room in Denmark and tell the stories from out in the world. Or we could still also even could even still be printed in a magazine. Sometimes the magazine still has, or the printed product still has its value for special occasions, events, festivals, whatever. So for us, it shouldn't matter on what platform we are publishing or doing our work. We should focus on the work itself and making sure that what we're doing is interesting, that it's different, that it has a value, that it's not something that's already out there and freely available. And this is a new kind of way of thinking for journalists. We've always been thinking about what's the most important, because that was, again, the question you need to ask yourself, the most important stories, because you were thinking that you were one outlet and you had this audience that you need to reach and tell the most important stories. Now we have to think about what's the most interesting story based on all these things, all this content that's already available. And that means that not just there's more focus on the individual thing that we're producing or the talk we're having or whatever, but it also means that there's much more emphasis on the individual journalist. And we need to understand that also, that in a sense we become much more like performers or artists or whatever. We have to be to have our own niche. We have to have our own way of doing things that are special and are different from what everyone else is doing. This is what we think we can have with the correspondence, with this platform, because there are not that many Danes who are living and based around the world and understand the local culture. We speak the languages. We have a deep insight into the culture and the history of these countries. And of course, we're storytellers. We have this ability to tell stories. So we need to use those strengths and work with those strengths to make to redefine ourselves and to make sure that this is what is important. That we have these special capabilities and we have to make use of them in all the ways that we can. And that's why we see ourselves less as a new media and more as a collective of storytellers that are based around the world. And this also means that what we need to is to work with other creative people, and people like you guys, to think about how can we then tell these stories in a more powerful way. How can we use technological advances to tell and to mix all of these kinds of media online and tell stories in a much more engaging way. Because we believe that what people are looking for when you have these abundance of information, quick information, news, that in this case kind of situations, what you need, what you're looking for, is these spaces where you can go in depth, where you can focus, where you can have a more unique experience. That's why you might show up at an event like this and you will sit and you'll be focused during the entire talk, while if you go online you will be distracted all the time. So you need to create those spaces, those few spaces where you can go in depth, where you can keep a focus, where you can get more of an insight, get more perspective on the world, not just the information. So this is what we need to create. We need to create them online, we need to create them offline, because that's the only way we can make use of our strengths around the world. That's why we need you, and we are very open for any suggestions that you might have as to how we create those spaces where you can go in depth with things. We've started out our campaign by to make this magazine, as we say, this is our own platform. This is what's going to be our profile, our brand, and we've then started out by crowdfunding to get this magazine started. So this is going to be the base for, like I said, doing all these other kind of things that doesn't have to happen in a magazine itself. Because again, we shouldn't be focused only on that platform. So this is what we're doing, and if you think what is interesting and you want to support us, you can do it right now on SWIP, or you can go on this address that's right here, bit.ly/spondetana. It will take you to the crowdfunding site. So I think I will leave it to that and have some questions.
That was it. Thank you so much.